On April 15, 2026, a trusted military officer walked into a room with a simple mission: overthrow the man who had placed confidence in him. But what Captain Barry Abdane didn't know was that his own soldiers would become his undoing. And in doing so, they would expose a conspiracy that reaches far beyond Ouagadougou's walls. This is the story of how one African leader's refusal to bow became the spark that exposed a cycle of betrayal, foreign interference, and the desperate fight for continental sovereignty that has been playing out for decades. And it all started with an inside job that nearly worked. Let's set the scene. Ibrahim Traoré is not your typical African leader. After taking power in 2022, he became the third consecutive military ruler in Burkina Faso. But unlike his predecessors, he did something different. He started talking about sovereignty. He started questioning the French military presence on his soil. He began making overtures to Russia, to other nations that didn't have centuries of colonial history in West Africa. He was, by all accounts, becoming dangerous, not to his own people, but to the carefully constructed order that had governed the region for generations. By 2025, Traoré had become something the West found increasingly difficult to tolerate. A leader who genuinely seemed committed to breaking the chains of external control. He wasn't just rhetoric. He was moving against French interests in concrete ways. He was consolidating power among loyalists who shared his vision. He was building something that looked increasingly like authentic independence. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Within the military, within Traoré's own trusted officer corps, there was a man preparing to change everything. Captain Barry Abdane wasn't some obscure figure. He held significant position, which meant he had access, credibility, and the trust of those around him. He was, in many ways, the perfect weapon. Someone close enough to strike, positioned to exploit the very loyalty structure that Traoré had built. And on April 16, 2025, Abdane moved. The conspiracy that unfolded was sophisticated. It wasn't simply a group of ambitious officers wanting power for themselves. According to accounts of what happened, Abdane had reached beyond the military. He had made contact with terrorist groups operating in the Sahel region, the same groups that have destabilized the entire area for years. He had built a coalition of the disaffected, the foreign-backed, and those who benefited from the chaos that Traoré was trying to bring under control. This wasn't just about removing a leader. This was about ensuring that Burkina Faso could never consolidate the kind of independence that Traoré represented. But that's not the full story. Because somewhere in this web of conspiracy, loyalty reasserted itself. Somewhere in those barracks, among those soldiers, there were men who recognized what was happening. There were officers and soldiers who understood that this wasn't just about Traoré as a person. It was about the future of their nation. And they made a choice that would determine the course of events. The plot was exposed before it could fully execute. Abdane and his conspirators were stopped. But here's what makes this moment truly significant. What happened next revealed the architecture of how regional power actually works in 2025 West Africa. After his failure, Barry Abdane didn't disappear into a prison cell. He fled. He made his way across the border into Ivory Coast, and once there, he found refuge. Not just refuge, protection. The kind of protection that suggests state-level involvement or, at minimum, deliberate non-cooperation with extradition. This detail is crucial because it raises a question that echoes far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Who was backing this coup attempt? And what does the fact that the conspirator found safe haven in Ivory Coast tell us about the geopolitical alignments in West Africa? To understand the answer, we need to rewind the clock. We need to look at Ivory Coast not as it exists in isolation, but as a piece of a much larger puzzle that has been assembled over decades. The story of Ivory Coast and its relationship to French power is the story of a nation that has never quite been allowed to determine its own destiny. The country has been through civil wars, devastating conflicts that tore it apart and killed hundreds of thousands. It has been through coups. It has been through the kind of political instability that, conveniently, always seemed to create situations where French intervention was necessary, where French troops needed to maintain order, where French economic interests needed protection. Then came Alassane Ouattara, Ouattara's rise to power is presented in official Western narratives as a story of stability finally arriving in Ivory Coast. A technocrat who understood economics. A leader who maintained good relations with the international community. But there's another version of this story. A version that suggests Ouattara's consolidation of power was less about organic political development and more about the deliberate installation of a leader who could be relied upon to maintain the system that benefited external powers. Consider the context. Ouattara's rise happened during a period of intense regional conflict. When he came to power, it was with the backing of French forces and international institutions. France, which had centuries of colonial history in Ivory Coast, which had maintained military bases and deep economic ties even after formal independence, found in Ouattara a leader who was willing to work within the existing framework of dependency. The result was predictable. Ivory Coast remained tied to French economic interests, French military presence, and the French-dominated franc currency zone that keeps West African economies structurally dependent on Paris. Here's the pattern, and it's important to recognize it because it's being repeated in real time in Burkina Faso. France didn't need to openly control Ivory Coast. It didn't need to station massive armies or install a puppet government with a French commissioner sitting in the presidential palace. That kind of colonialism belongs to the 19th century. Instead, what France developed was something far more sophisticated. A system of influence through economic dependency, through supporting leaders who would maintain that dependency, and through ensuring that any leader who threatened to break the pattern would be destabilized or removed. Ouattara, whatever his intentions, became part of this system. Ivory Coast, under his leadership, remained integrated into the French-dominated economic order. The military remained dependent on French training and support. The currency remained the CFA franc, a currency whose value is guaranteed by the French treasury, which gives Paris direct leverage over Ivorian economic policy. The political system remained structured in ways that favored continuity with the existing order. And then comes April 2025 and the attempted coup in Burkina Faso. And suddenly all of these pieces start connecting. Because what happened with Barry Abdain's conspiracy reveals the mechanics of how this system actually functions on the ground. It reveals that the relationship between Ouattara's Ivory Coast and the preservation of the old order isn't accidental. It reveals that when someone like Ibrahim Traoré emerges, a leader who actually seems committed to breaking these patterns, the response isn't subtle. It's not diplomatic pressure or economic sanctions. It's destabilization from within. Think about what the attempted coup represented. If it had succeeded, Traoré would have been removed. A government more sympathetic to regional integration with Ivory Coast, and by extension to the existing French-influenced order, would have taken power. Burkina Faso would have been pulled back into the orbit of dependencies that it had begun to escape. The country's resources, its military, its strategic position in West Africa would have remained available for external manipulation. But it failed. And that failure is important because it suggests something. Loyalty to a genuinely independence-minded leader still has power. The soldiers who exposed the plot chose their country over personal advancement. They chose a vision of sovereignty over the security that comes with collaborating with more powerful external forces. Here's where things get interesting from a historical perspective. This pattern of attempted destabilization through internal conspirators, combined with external refuge and support, isn't new in West Africa. It's been the dominant method of maintaining control for generations. A leader emerges who threatens the existing order, who questions foreign military bases, who talks about renegotiating economic relationships, who begins to integrate with other nations outside the traditional Western sphere. And suddenly there are problems. Suddenly there are rebellions. Suddenly there are coups. Suddenly there are conspirators within the government offering themselves as alternatives. France has been exceptionally effective at playing this game. From supporting specific leaders in coups to maintaining the architecture of economic dependency through the CFA franc. France's influence in West Africa has survived decolonization, civil wars, and multiple regime changes precisely because it operates through these indirect mechanisms. It doesn't need to occupy the territory anymore. It just needs to ensure that the territory's leadership remains amenable to French interests. What makes Traoré different, what made him dangerous enough to warrant a coup attempt, is that he seemed willing to actually break these patterns. He wasn't just making nationalist speeches. He was taking concrete action. He was building relationships with nations outside the Western sphere. He was questioning the French military presence. He was attempting to consolidate power among loyalists who shared a vision of genuine independence. He was, in other words, attempting to do what several previous leaders in West Africa have attempted and what virtually all of them have failed to accomplish: actually achieve sustained sovereignty in a region that the international system had designated as dependent. The attempted coup was, in this context, not a random act by ambitious conspirators. It was what happens when someone gets too close to succeeding in that impossible task. The response was designed, consciously or not, to pull Burkina Faso back from the edge of genuine independence. And the fact that Ibrahim found refuge in Ivory Coast, a nation led by someone who has consistently maintained good relations with France and the Western Order, suggests that the regional architecture of dependency remains intact. The attempted coup represents an effort to maintain that architecture. The refuge in Ivory Coast represents the safety net that catches those who participate in such efforts. The conspiracy, in other words, was part of a larger system that remains functional and dangerous. But here's what makes this moment genuinely significant for the future of West Africa. The fact that the coup failed at all suggests a crack in the system. If Traoré's forces could defeat this conspiracy, could prevent the destabilization before it took hold, then perhaps the pattern can be broken. Perhaps a leader who actually commits to sovereignty, who actually builds loyal institutions, who actually resists the temptation to accommodate external powers, can survive long enough to create lasting change. That's the stakes of what happened on April 16th. It wasn't just about one country or one leader. It was about whether the cycle of attempted destabilization through internal conspiracy and external support can actually be broken in contemporary West Africa. It was about whether a leader can commit to genuine independence and actually win. It was about whether the pattern that has governed the region for centuries can finally be interrupted. What happened next in the days and weeks following the exposure of the plot would tell us much about which way that question will be answered. If Traoré can consolidate his position, if he can continue to build institutions and relationships that support Burkinabe sovereignty, then the April 16th failed coup might become a turning point, not just for Burkina Faso, but for the broader pattern of how West Africa relates to external powers. But if the instability continues, if the conspiracy represented just the first move in a longer campaign of destabilization, if Traoré and his vision of sovereignty face an endless succession of challenges orchestrated from outside, then the April 16th failed coup represents something else entirely. A moment when the system actually tried to correct a deviation, when it nearly succeeded, and when the outcome remained uncertain. Here's the crucial part that we need to understand about how modern imperialism actually functions in Africa. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't march in with flags and uniforms and declarations of occupation. Instead, it works through the installation of friendly leaders, through the creation of economic dependencies that are difficult to escape, through the support of conspirators and destabilizers when a leader threatens to break the pattern. It works by making the path of compliance comfortable and the path of resistance costly and dangerous. Traoré understood this. That's why he was reaching out to other powers, why he was questioning French military presence, why he was attempting to consolidate loyalty within his own military and government. He was trying to make the path of resistance less costly and more sustainable. He was trying to build an alternative architecture of support and loyalty that could survive the conspiracies and attempted destabilizations that he knew would come. And on April 16, 2025, his strategy at least partially worked. The conspiracy was exposed. The conspirators were stopped. The attempted coup failed. This suggests that authentic resistance to external control is possible, even in the context of deeply entrenched patterns of dependency and interference. It suggests that loyalty to a vision of national sovereignty can compete with the promises and pressures offered by those who benefit from dependency. But it also raises a question that extends far beyond Burkina Faso. How many times can a leader resist? How long can loyalty to a vision of sovereignty hold up against repeated attempts at destabilization? How sustainable is resistance when external powers have centuries of experience in perfecting the techniques of indirect control? These aren't abstract questions. They're the questions that will determine the future of West Africa, and indeed of much of the African continent. They're the questions that will determine whether the cycle of external manipulation and internal betrayal can actually be broken, or whether the patterns that have governed the region since colonialism will simply adapt and continue in new forms. The April 16th coup attempt in Burkina Faso and the exposure of Barry Abdain's conspiracy gives us a window into how that larger struggle is actually unfolding. It shows us that resistance is possible, but it also shows us how sophisticated and multifaceted the mechanisms of external control have become. It shows us that the enemy isn't always an external invader or a foreign military force. Sometimes it's the officer next to you, someone trusted and positioned to strike from within. And it shows us something else, that the future of African sovereignty depends on whether countries can develop institutions and leaders committed enough to that vision to withstand the inevitable conspiracies and destabilization attempts that will come. It depends on whether loyalty to a nation's independence can actually prevail against the pressures, promises, and threats offered by those who benefit from dependency. On April 16, 2025, in Burkina Faso, that loyalty was tested, and for at least a moment, it held. The question that faces the continent now is whether that moment can be sustained, whether that resistance can be consolidated into something more permanent, and whether the pattern that has governed West Africa for generations can finally be broken. Because if it can't, if Traoré falls, if another conspirator emerges, if Burkina Faso is pulled back into the orbit of dependency that Ivory Coast never escaped, then the lesson will be clear. The system of indirect control has once again proven more durable than the vision of authentic independence. The cycle will continue, adapted for the 21st century, but fundamentally unchanged from the patterns that have governed the region for centuries. But if the resistance holds, if Traoré survives, if Burkina Faso actually manages to consolidate a different kind of relationship with external powers, one based on genuine partnership rather than dependency, on mutual respect rather than subordination, then April 16th might become remembered as something else entirely. Not as a failed coup, but as a turning point. Not as the failure of one leader's vision, but as the beginning of a shift in how an entire region relates to external power. That's what makes this moment significant. That's why the April 16th coup attempt matters not just for Burkina Faso, but for the future trajectory of the African continent itself. Because hidden within the details of one failed conspiracy is the larger question of whether Africa can finally escape the patterns of external manipulation that have shaped its history, or whether those patterns will simply evolve and persist in new forms. The answer to that question will be written in the months and years ahead, in how Traoré consolidates his power, in how other West African leaders respond to his example, and in whether the vision of genuine African sovereignty that he represents can actually survive the inevitable attempts at destabilization that remain ahead.